The maid found the vampire prince freezing in the ruins, abandoned and shivering in the dark. Without thinking, she wrapped him in her cloak and held him close through the coldest night. What the vampire king did when he discovered a human dared to touch his son left the entire kingdom speechless. The first explosion shattered the eastern tower at midnight. Lyra dropped the silver tray she was carrying. Goblets clattered across the marble floor, wine spreading like blood. Through the arched windows, she saw flames licking up the citadel's ancient walls, orange and hungry against the black sky. Breach in the lower halls. A guard's scream cut through the chaos before ending abruptly. Too abruptly. Lyra's heart hammered. In her 6 months serving at the vampire citadel, she'd learned one crucial rule. When guards stop screaming, something worse has already happened. She grabbed her skirts and ran. The corridors filled with smoke. Vampire nobles swept past her in blurs of silk and fury, their eyes glowing red as they rushed toward the battle. None of them looked at her. To them, she was furniture a human made, invisible and insignificant. Another explosion rocked the floor beneath her feet. Lyra stumbled, catching herself against a pillar. Somewhere above, the ancient chandelier she'd polished just that morning crashed down in a cascade of crystal. Then she remembered. The prince. Little Adrian had been in the music room for his evening lessons. The music room with its tall windows and wooden floors, right above the lower chambers where the attack had started. Lyra changed direction, fighting against the tide of fleeing servants. "Wrong way, girl," someone shouted. The king ordered all humans to the surface. She didn't stop. The music room door hung broken on its hinges. Inside, chairs lay overturned, sheet music scattered like autumn leaves. The harpsichord had tipped forward, its strings still vibrating with a discordant hum. "Prince Adrian." Lyra's voice cracked from the smoke. A whimper answered from behind the instrument. She found him curled in the corner, his small body trembling. At 8 years old, Adrian looked like any human child, pale skin, dark curls falling over frightened eyes. Only the slight point to his ears and the hint of fangs when he cried betrayed his vampire heritage. "Miss Lyra," his voice was so small. She knelt beside him, checking for injuries. His silk tunic was torn, and a bruise darkened his left cheek, but nothing seemed broken. "Can you walk?" He nodded, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The half-human blood that ran through his veins, his mother's legacy before she died in childbirth, made him weaker than pure vampire children, especially when he was afraid. A roar echoed from below. Not human. Not quite vampire either, something twisted and wrong. Lyra scooped Adrian into her arms. He was lighter than she expected, his bones bird fragile. She moved toward the main door, but a shadow blocked the hallway beyond. The creature that stepped into view had once been vampire. Now its face was a mass of scars, its eyes milky white, its mouth stretched too wide. It wore the armor of Volek's clan, the rival vampire lord who'd been circling the citadel for months, testing its defenses. The thing's head tilted, nostrils flaring as it scented them. Human. It rasped, then its ruined gaze fixed on Adrian. And royal blood. Lyra backed toward the windows, her mind racing. 3 stories up. The ground below was marble courtyard. Certain death. The creature lunged. Lyra threw herself sideways, crashing through a side door she'd barely noticed. They tumbled down a servant staircase, Adrian's weight nearly crushing her as they rolled. The creature's claws scraped the wall behind them, missing her ankle by inches. She didn't know where she was going, just down, away, somewhere safe. The stairs opened into the lower chambers, but these weren't the grand halls she'd cleaned. These were older, carved from the mountain itself when the citadel was first built. The air tasted of stone and age. Behind them, the creature's footsteps thundered closer. Lyra spotted it, a heavy iron door, partially hidden behind a tapestry. The kind of door meant to seal something in, or out. She hauled it open with strength born of pure terror, dragged Adrian inside, and slammed it shut. An ancient bolt slid home just as the creature hit the other side. The metal shuddered, but held. For a moment, Lyra just breathed. Then Adrian started crying. Shoo, it's all right, Lyra whispered, though nothing was all right. The creature outside had stopped throwing itself against the door. That somehow seemed worse. She looked around. They were in a cellar, vast and empty, supported by stone pillars that disappeared into shadow. No other exits.
No windows.
The only light came from gaps in the floor above, where the citadel burned. Another explosion, closer now. The ceiling rained dust. Adrian's crying turned to shaking, violent tremors that had nothing to do with fear. Cold, he gasped. So cold. Lyra touched his forehead. His skin was ice. Of course. The cellars were deep underground, and with his half-human blood, Adrian couldn't regulate his temperature like full vampires. The cold here was the kind that seeped into bones and didn't let go. She looked at her own thin servant's dress, then at the boy who might die of exposure before dawn. Above them, the citadel tore itself apart. Outside that door, monsters prowled. And somewhere in the chaos, King Lucian fought a war he might not win. Lyra made her decision. She tore off her outer cloak, the thick wool one she'd been given for winter service, and wrapped it around Adrian. Then she lay down beside him on the cold stone floor, pulling him close. What are you doing? His teeth chattered. Keeping you warm, she rubbed his arms, his back, anywhere to generate heat. My mother used to say humans are like little furnaces. Our blood runs hot. Father says humans are weak. Maybe. But right now, this weak human is all you've got. Adrian pressed closer, his cold face against her shoulder. Gradually, his shaking eased. The hours crawled past. Lyra whispered every story she knew, fairy tales her grandmother had told her, legends of heroes and dragons, even the silly rhymes children sang in the village. Anything to keep his mind from the screams and explosions above. At some point, Adrian's hand found hers. You won't leave, he whispered. I won't leave, Lyra promised, though she had no idea if she could keep it. Not until your father comes. What she couldn't know, was that 3 chambers above them, King Lucian crouched in the blood-soaked throne room, his hand pressed to his chest where his heart should be. Through the blood bond he shared with his son, he could feel Adrian's fear fading into exhausted calm, could sense a warmth that didn't belong to vampire flesh, could hear a human girl's voice, steady and fierce. I won't leave. Not until your father comes. For the first time in 2 centuries, Lucian felt something shift in his ancient, frozen heart. But first he had a war to finish. The fires above had stopped spreading, but that didn't mean safety. It meant Volek's forces were searching room by room. Lyra pressed her ear against the iron door. Footsteps. Voices speaking in the harsh, guttural dialect of the rival clan. They were close, too close. Check every chamber. The king's whelp couldn't have gone far. Half-breed won't survive the night anyway. Weak blood. Laughter, cruel and sharp, then the footsteps faded. Lyra released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Are they gone? Adrian's voice was barely a whisper against her shoulder. For now. But the cold was getting worse. The temperature in the cellar had dropped so low that Lyra could see her own breath misting in the thin light from above. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. Adrian's shaking had returned, more violent than before. Talk to me, Lyra said, rubbing his arms harder. Tell me something. Anything. I can't feel my legs.
Panic spiked through her chest.
She'd seen hypothermia before in the village. Travelers caught in winter storms, their skin turning blue, their words slurring until they just
stopped.
Adrian, listen to me. She tilted his face up. His lips had lost their color. You have to stay awake. Tired. I know. But you can't sleep yet. She pulled him even closer, wrapping her arms and legs around him, trying to share every bit of warmth her human body could generate. Your father is coming. King Lucien is the strongest vampire in all the territories, right? A tiny nod. Then he'll come. He'll tear through every enemy, break down every wall, and he'll find you. But you have to hold on. What if? What if he doesn't? The question hung in the freezing air. Lyra had asked herself the same thing a dozen times. What if the king had fallen? What if Volek had won? What if they were alone down here, forgotten, left to freeze in the dark? Then I'll get you out myself, she said, and meant it. I'll break down that door, carry you through every monster in the citadel, and I'll take you somewhere safe, even if I have to walk all the way to the human territories. Adrian's eyes, so much like his father's, gold-flecked and ancient despite his young face, studied her. You're just a maid. I'm a maid who's very stubborn. For the first time since the attack began, Adrian smiled. Small and brief, but real. Mother was human too, he whispered. Father says I look like her. Lyra had heard the story in whispers among the other servants. The human bride who'd captured the vampire king's heart, who died bringing Adrian into the world. Some said Lucien had loved her. Others said she'd been a political pawn. No one knew the truth except the king himself. Then she must have been beautiful, Lyra said softly. Father doesn't talk about her. Not ever. Adrian's voice cracked. Sometimes I think he wishes I'd never been born. That she'd lived instead of me. No, Lyra's response was immediate and fierce. Don't ever think that. You are not a burden, Adrian. You're a person and you're worth protecting. Even though I'm weak? Even though I'm not a real vampire? Especially because of that, she brushed the dark curls from his forehead. Being different doesn't make you less. It makes you more. Adrian didn't answer, but his grip on her hand tightened. The hours bled together in the darkness. Lyra told more stories, some she invented on the spot when her memory failed. Tales of brave knights and clever maidens, of dragons who learned to be kind, of kingdoms where humans and vampires lived without fear. That's not real, Adrian murmured. Humans and vampires can't be friends. Why not? Because that's just how it is. Maybe it's time for how it is to change. Somewhere in the third or fourth hour, Lyra had lost count. Adrian finally stopped shivering. At first, she thought it was a good sign. Then she realized his breathing had become shallow, his skin waxy in the dim light. Adrian, she shook him gently. Stay with me. Sorry, his eyes fluttered closed. So tired. Desperation clawed at her throat. She pulled him fully on top of her, letting her body heat, what little remained, flow directly into him. Her own teeth chattered now. Her vision swam. Please, she whispered to the darkness, to the gods, to anyone listening. Please let him live.
Take me if you want.
Just let him live. The seller didn't answer. Lyra pressed her cheek against Adrian's hair and kept whispering promises, prayers, fragments of lullabies. Her voice grew hoarse, then faded to barely a breath. She didn't know when she started drifting. When the cold stopped feeling cold and became something almost warm. When her grip on consciousness began to slip. I'm sorry, she thought. I tried. But even as the darkness pulled her down, she kept her arms locked around the small boy. Even in unconsciousness, she would keep her promise. Above them, dawn was breaking through the smoke and ash. And in the ruins of his throne room, King Lucien stood over Volek's second-in-command, blood dripping from his blade. Where, he said, his voice deadly quiet, is my son? The dying vampire smiled through broken fangs. In the deep places. In the cold. Probably frozen by now. Him and his little human pet. Lucien's hand shot out, gripping the vampire's throat. Through the blood bond, he felt it, a flicker, faint as a dying candle. Adrian's life force, barely there. And wrapped around it, impossibly, another heartbeat. Human. Steady. Refusing to let go. The vampire king's eyes blazed gold. Show me. Lucien moved through the citadel like a storm given form. His generals struggled to keep pace as he descended into the bowels of the fortress. Behind him, the great hall still smoldered. Bodies of Volek soldiers lined the corridors, those who'd been foolish enough to stand between a vampire king and his son. "Sire, we should secure the upper levels first," General Thane began. "I gave you an order." Lucien's voice could have frozen blood. "Find every enemy still breathing and end them. I have more important matters." He didn't wait for response. The blood bond pulled him deeper, through passages he hadn't walked in decades. Through the servants' quarters, down the hidden stairs, into the ancient cellars where the citadel's first stones had been laid. The bond grew stronger with each step, but also weaker, like a thread stretched too thin, ready to snap. "Hold on," Lucien thought, pushing himself faster. "Just hold on." He found the iron door half buried under fallen debris from the explosion. The tapestry that had hidden it was now ash. Claw marks scored the metal where something had tried, and failed, to break through. Lucien wrenched the door open, tearing it from its hinges. The sight that met him stopped him cold. His son lay motionless on the stone floor, wrapped in a threadbare cloak. And beside him, no, around him, was a girl. A human girl with tangled brown hair and servant's clothes, her arms locked around Adrian's small body, even in unconsciousness. For a moment that stretched too long, Lucien simply stared. In 200 years of existence, he'd seen courage in many forms. He'd watched armies charge into certain death. He'd seen vampires face the sun for honor. He'd witnessed sacrifices both noble and foolish. But this was a human maid who'd chosen to lie on freezing stone, sharing her warmth with a vampire child while the world burned above them. Who'd stayed when every instinct should have screamed at her to run. Who'd kept her arms around his son, even as her own life slipped away. "Sire?" Thane appeared in the doorway behind him, then froze. "Is that? Get the healer." Now Lucien's voice was sharp as a blade. He crossed the cellar in 3 strides and knelt beside them. His hand hovered over Adrian's face, checking for breath. They're faint but present. The boy lived. Lucien lifted his son carefully, and as he did, the girl's arms finally loosened. She didn't wake. Her skin was pale as death, her lips tinged blue. She'd given everything. "The girl too," Lucien said quietly. Thane hesitated. "Sire, she's human." "I'm aware." Lucien gathered Lyra into his other arm. She weighed almost nothing. "Are you questioning my orders?" "No, sire." Thane stepped back quickly. Lucien carried both of them up through the ruined citadel. Servants and soldiers alike pressed themselves against walls as he passed, their eyes wide with shock. The vampire king, holding a human girl as carefully as his own son. In the royal chambers, one of the few rooms that hadn't been damaged, he laid them on his own bed. The healer, an ancient vampire named Mira, rushed in with her supplies. "The prince first," Lucien commanded. Mira worked quickly, checking Adrian's temperature, his pulse, his breathing. "Severe hypothermia, but he'll recover." Another hour and she didn't finish. She didn't need to. "And the girl?" Mira moved to Lyra, her wrinkled hands surprisingly gentle. After a long moment, she looked up. "I don't understand. By all logic, she should be dead. She's lost dangerous amounts of body heat, but her heart still beats. Will she live?" "If we warm her carefully, yes. But sire, why risk resources on a human?" Lucien's gaze remained fixed on Lyra's pale face. "This human saved my son's life. She was just doing her duty." Her duty? For the first time, anger crept into Lucien's voice. Her duty was to flee with the other servants to safety. Instead, she ran toward danger to protect a vampire child. She held him through the night, knowing she might die. "Tell me, Mira, how many of our kind would do the same for a human?" The healer had no answer. "Save her," Lucien said, softer now. "Use whatever means necessary." As Mira worked, Applying heated stones and blankets, Lucian sat in a chair beside the bed. His son slept on one side, the human girl on the other. Through the blood bond, he could feel Adrian's dreams, fragmented and fearful, but alive. And he could still hear it, the echo of words spoken in the dark. "I won't leave. Not until your father comes." She'd kept her promise. She'd stayed. For the first time in decades, since his wife died bringing Adrian into the world, Lucian felt something crack in the ice around his heart. A knock at the door. One of his advisors, Lord Varen, entered and stopped short at the scene. "My king, the council has assembled. They wish to discuss the attack, the casualties," and his eyes flickered to Lyra. "Certain irregularities." Irregularities? A human was found in contact with the royal heir. The council believes this requires examination. Lucian stood slowly, his full height suddenly filling the room with quiet menace. "Tell the council," he said, each word precise as a knife cut, "that if any harm comes to this girl, they will answer to me personally. Is that clear?" Varen bowed hastily. "Perfectly, sire." But as the advisor left, Lucian knew the truth. The council wouldn't let this go. They never did when it came to matters of purity, tradition, and the ancient laws that separated vampire from human. The real battle, he realized, was just beginning. 3 days later, Lyra woke to silk sheets and golden light. For a moment, she thought she'd died. Then the ache in her bones reminded her that the dead don't feel pain. "You're awake." She turned her head, a monumental effort, and found a young vampire woman sitting beside the bed. Not a servant, judging by her fine clothes. Her eyes were kind, though cautious. "Where?" "The royal chambers." "You've been unconscious since the king brought you up from the cellars," the woman offered a cup of water. "I'm Elena, one of the court healers. How do you feel?" "Like I was frozen and thawed." Lyra's voice came out raspy. She tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed in protest. "Adrian, the prince, is he?" "Alive and well. Thanks to you," Elena smiled. "He's been asking about you constantly. Driving the entire staff mad, actually." Relief flooded through Lyra so intensely she had to close her eyes. "Why am I here? In the king's chambers?" Elena's smile faded. "The king's orders. He wanted you protected and well cared for," she hesitated. "Though that's complicated matters." Before Lyra could ask what that meant, the door opened. King Lucian entered, and the air itself seemed to shift. He was taller than she remembered, his presence filling the room like a physical force. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes, those gold-flecked eyes that Adrian had inherited, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Leave us," he said to Elena. The healer bowed and left quickly. Lucian approached the bed, and Lyra's instinct screamed at her to lower her gaze, to show submission as all humans did before vampire nobility. But something in his expression held her frozen. "You saved my son's life," he said. "Not a question. I only did what anyone would." "Don't," the word was soft but absolute. "Don't diminish what you did. Adrian told me everything. You ran toward danger when others fled. You stayed with him through the night, knowing you might die." Lyra swallowed. "He's just a child. He's a vampire child. Many of your kind would have left him to his fate. Then many of my kind are cowards." Something flickered in Lucian's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect. "The council has demanded your presence," he said.
Today, there are
"Questions about what happened in that cellar." "Questions?" "You made physical contact with the royal heir. You held him. In vampire law, that's..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Unprecedented." Fear, cold and sharp, shot through Lyra's chest. "I was trying to keep him warm." "I know. But the council sees only a broken tradition." His jaw tightened. "They're calling it impurity. Contamination. Will they kill me?" Lucian's expression darkened. "Not while I draw breath." The council chamber was a vast room of black marble and blood-red banners. Lyra stood at its center, still weak from her ordeal, wearing a simple gray dress someone had provided. Around her, in a semicircle of ornate chairs, sat the Vampire Council, 12 ancient beings whose cold eyes tracked her every movement. Adrian sat beside his father's throne, his small face pale with worry. Lord Morvain, eldest of the council, rose first. His face was a map of centuries, his voice like stones grinding together. The human maid, Lyra of the Western Villages, stands accused of improper contact with vampire royalty. The laws are ancient and clear. Humans serve, but do not touch. They obey, but do not presume. His gaze bore into her. Yet you dared to lay hands upon the heir to our throne. You dared to hold him, as if he were your equal. I was saving his life, Lyra said, her voice steadier than she felt. Or so you claim. Another council member, Lady Thessa, leaned forward. How convenient that you were alone with the prince. That no other witnesses can verify your story. I can verify it. Adrian's voice rang out, high and clear.
She protected me.
She kept me warm. She promised she wouldn't leave, and she didn't. The prince is a child, Morvain said dismissively, traumatized by the attack. His testimony is compromised. My testimony is not. Lucien's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Through the blood bond, I felt everything. I heard her promise to protect my son. I felt her warmth when his life was fading. Even so, Thessa pressed, the law exists for a reason. To allow this precedent is to invite chaos. Next, humans will think they can touch any vampire noble, claiming protection or friendship. The natural order must be maintained. The natural order? Lyra found herself speaking before she could stop herself. The natural order let a child freeze to death because tradition mattered more than life. Gasps rippled through the chamber. One didn't speak to the council that way. Certainly not a human. Morvain's eyes flashed red. You dare. A commotion at the chamber doors cut him off. A guard burst in, breaking every protocol. My king. Urgent news. This council is not to be interrupted, Morvain began. Volek's forces, the guard gasped. They've regrouped at the northern pass. And sire, we found evidence of a spy. Someone inside the citadel has been feeding them information. Someone close to the royal family. The council erupted into chaos. Lucien rose from his throne, his expression terrible. Find them. Lock down the citadel. No one enters or leaves without my personal approval. He turned to Lyra, his eyes meeting hers across the chamber. This conversation isn't over, he said. But it will have to wait. As guards rushed to secure the citadel, Lyra felt ice settle into her stomach that had nothing to do with the cold cellar. Someone had betrayed them. And somehow, she knew the worst was yet to come. The spy struck at midnight. Lyra had been moved to a small chamber near the royal wing, close enough for protection, but far enough to avoid scandalizing the council further. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the council's accusations in her mind. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A soft scuffle, a muffled gasp, and Adrian's voice, frightened and small. No, let go. Lyra threw off her blankets and rushed to the door. The hallway was dark, lit only by dying torches. 2 chambers down, Adrian's door stood open. Inside, a figure in servant's clothes held the struggling boy, one hand clamped over his mouth. Stop! Lyra's shout echoed down the corridor. The figure's head snapped toward her, and she recognized him. Garrett, one of the senior household staff. A vampire who'd served the Citadel for decades. His eyes met hers, and something cold passed through his expression. I'm sorry, he said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. But they're paying enough to change everything. For all of us. He moved with vampire speed, carrying Adrian toward the servants' passage. Lyra ran after them, her still weakened legs burning with effort. Guards. Guards. But the hallway remained silent. Too silent. She rounded a corner and nearly tripped over a body, one of Adrian's personal guards, sprawled unconscious, a sickly sweet smell rising from a cloth beside him. Poison. Garrett had poisoned them all. Ahead, the spy disappeared through a concealed door Lyra had never noticed. She plunged after him, emerging into the freezing night air. Snow had fallen while she'd been inside, covering the grounds in pristine white. Garrett's footprints led toward the forest. Lyra's rational mind screamed at her to go back, to get help, to let the king's soldiers handle this. But Adrian's terrified face flashed in her memory, and her legs kept moving. The forest was dark and hostile. Branches clawed at her thin dress. Her breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the frigid air. But she followed the prince, followed the sound of movement ahead. She nearly ran straight into them. Garrett stood in a clearing, Adrian still struggling in his arms. But he wasn't alone. 20 soldiers in Volek's colors surrounded them, their weapons drawn, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. And at their center stood a vampire who could only be Volek's captain, a woman with a scarred face and cruel smile. "Well," the captain said, looking Lyra up and down. "The famous human. The one who thinks she can protect vampire royalty." Lyra's hands clenched into fists. "Let him go." Laughter rippled through the soldiers. "Let him go." The captain stepped closer. "This half-breed whelp is our leverage. With him, we control the king. Lucien will surrender his territories, his power, everything, or watch his son die slowly. You won't get away with this," Lyra said, though her voice shook. "The king will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Oh, we're counting on it," the captain's smile widened. "That's why we left such an obvious trail. We want him to come. Want him to leave his precious citadel undefended while he chases us. And when he does, our main forces will strike." It was a trap. All of it. Adrian's eyes found Lyra's across the clearing. Tears streaked his face, but beneath the fear, she saw something else.
Trust.
He trusted her to do something, anything. But she was just a human.
Weak.
Unarmed. Surrounded by vampires who could tear her apart in seconds. "What should we do with this one?" One of the soldiers grabbed Lyra's arm, his grip bruising. "Kill her now." The captain considered. Volek might enjoy that. The king's son watching his little human protector die. It would break the boy nicely. She drew a long, curved blade. Lyra's mind raced. She had no weapons. No training. No chance in a straight fight. But she had something they didn't expect. She had nothing left to lose. As the captain raised her blade, Lyra suddenly went limp, dropping her full weight against the soldier holding her. He stumbled, surprised, and she drove her elbow back into his throat with every ounce of strength she had. He released her with a choking gasp. Lyra lunged forward, not at the captain, but at Garrett. She grabbed a fallen branch from the snow and swung it at his knee. It connected with a satisfying crack. He dropped, and Adrian tumbled free. "Run!" Lyra screamed at the boy. But Adrian didn't run. He grabbed Lyra's hand, and together they bolted toward the tree line. They made it 3 steps before the vampires caught them. Hands like iron vices seized Lyra from behind, lifting her off her feet. Another soldier grabbed Adrian, who kicked and bit uselessly. The captain appeared before them, her scarred face twisted with fury. Stupid. So incredibly stupid. She pressed the blade against Lyra's throat. The metal was cold. Sharp. "Any last words, human?" Lyra looked at Adrian, memorizing his face. At least she'd tried. At least she hadn't stood by and done nothing. "Just one," she whispered. "Duck." Adrian's eyes widened, and then the clearing exploded with crimson light. The vampire, holding Lyra, disintegrated into ash. The captain stumbled backward, her blade clattering to the snow. And standing at the edge of the clearing, his eyes blazing like molten gold, his power radiating in waves that bent the very air. King Lucien had arrived. "You," he said, his voice carrying the promise of death, made a grave mistake. The true battle was about to begin. Lucian moved like death given form. The first soldier lunged at him with a spear. Lucian caught the weapon mid-thrust, snapped it in half, and drove the splintered end through the vampire's chest. Ash exploded outward before the body hit the ground. "Protect the boy," the captain screamed. 5 soldiers surrounded Adrian, blades drawn. But Lyra was closer. She threw herself at the nearest one, clawing at his face with her bare hands. It was like attacking stone. He backhanded her almost casually, sending her sprawling into the snow. Blood filled her mouth. "Lyra!" Adrian's scream cut through the chaos. Lucian's head snapped toward her. For a fraction of a second, his attention wavered, and 3 soldiers struck at once. He was faster. He twisted between their blades, his own movements too quick for human eyes to follow. One soldier lost his head. Another crumpled with crushed ribs. The third tried to retreat and found Lucian's hand around his throat. "Where is Valek?" Lucian's voice was deadly quiet. "Go to hell." The vampire turned to ash between his fingers. The captain saw her forces dwindling and made her decision. She grabbed Adrian, pressing her blade to his throat. "Stop. One more step and the boy dies." Lucian froze. His eyes, burning gold, fixed on his son's terrified face. "You won't kill him," Lucian said. "He's your only leverage." "Maybe not kill." The captain's blade drew a thin line of blood on Adrian's neck. "But I can hurt him. Make him scream. Would you like to watch, Your Majesty?" From where she lay in the snow, Lyra's hand closed around something cold and metal, part of the broken spear, its point still sharp. She met Adrian's eyes, saw him glance down at the captain's leg, saw him understand. "I'm sorry," the captain whispered to Adrian with mock sympathy. "But this is going to." Adrian slammed his head backward into her face. It wasn't much, a child's desperate move, but it was enough to make her blade waver. And in that instant, Lyra drove the spear fragment up through the captain's calf. The vampire shrieked, her grip loosening. Adrian tore free and ran. Lucian was there in a blur, placing himself between his son and the captain. His expression was terrible to behold, not rage, but something colder, more final. "You threaten my son," he said simply. The captain tried to stand, tried to fight, but her wounded leg buckled. She looked up at Lucian, with defiance still burning in her eyes. "Valek will finish what we started. He's already." Lucian's blade took her head before she could finish. The remaining soldiers broke and ran. They made it to the tree line before Lucian's generals emerged from the shadows, Thane and his forces, who'd been tracking the spy from the citadel. None of the traitors survived. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by harsh breathing and the soft sound of snow beginning to fall again. Lucian turned to where Lyra still lay in the snow. She'd managed to sit up, one hand pressed to her bleeding mouth, the other still gripping the broken spear. He crossed the clearing in 3 strides and knelt beside her. "You stabbed her," his tone was unreadable. Yes," Lyra's voice shook. "Was I not supposed to? I know humans shouldn't harm vampires, but she was going to hurt Adrian, and I thought." "You thought correctly," something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. Though charging armed vampires with a stick was monumentally foolish. It worked, didn't it? This time he did smile, brief and genuine. Then his expression sobered as he took in her injuries. Blood trickled from her split lip, and bruises were already darkening on her arms where the soldiers had grabbed her. "Can you stand?" "I think so." He helped her to her feet, his hand surprisingly gentle. The moment she was upright, Adrian crashed into her, throwing his arms around her waist. "You came after me," he sobbed. "You came even though you could have died." Lyra smoothed his hair with a trembling hand. "I told you I wouldn't leave. I meant it." Over the boy's head, her eyes met Lucian's. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. "Sire," Thane approached, his armor splattered with ash. "We captured 2 alive. They're talking. Volek was never planning a second attack on the citadel. Then what? This was the attack. Kidnap the prince, draw you out, eliminate you here in the forest while you were vulnerable. With you dead and the heir in their possession, the citadel would have fallen without a fight. Lucien's jaw clenched. If Adrian had been taken even an hour earlier, if Lyra hadn't chased them, if she hadn't created that crucial opening. He looked at the human girl standing beside his son, both of them battered and bleeding but alive. She'd disrupted their entire plan with nothing but desperate courage and a broken spear. Get them both to the healers, Lucien ordered. Post triple guards on the royal wing. And find Garrett's body. I want to know who he was working with. As Thane moved to obey, Lucien placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder, then, after a moment's hesitation, on Lyra's as well. You saved him again, he said quietly. We saved each other, Lyra replied. Lucien nodded slowly, and for the first time since his wife's death, he felt something other than the weight of duty. He felt hope. The walk back through the snow felt longer than the desperate chase into the forest. Lyra's legs trembled with each step, adrenaline fading and leaving only exhaustion and pain. Her split lip throbbed. Her ribs ached where she'd been thrown into the ground. But she kept moving, kept her hand on Adrian's shoulder as much for her own stability as his comfort. Lucien led them through the forest in silence, his generals forming a protective circle. Every few steps, his eyes flickered back to Lyra, checking, assessing. When she stumbled over a root, his hand shot out to steady her before she even registered she was falling. I can walk, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I know you can, but his hand remained under her elbow. That doesn't mean you should. By the time they reached the citadel gates, dawn was breaking over the mountains, pink and gold against the snow. The courtyard filled quickly with soldiers, servants, council members drawn by the commotion. Lord Morvain was there, his ancient face creased with concern. Your Majesty, thank the darkness you're safe. When we discovered the prince missing, he stopped short as his eyes fell on Lyra. Why is the human girl covered in blood? Because she chased kidnappers into the forest alone, Lucien said flatly. Stabbed one through the leg to free my son. Gave me the opening I needed to end this. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through leaves. Impossible, someone muttered. A human attacked a vampire? She touched the prince again. Enough, Lucien's voice cracked like thunder. The courtyard fell silent. Get the healers.
Now.
Mira arrived within moments, taking in the scene with wide eyes. She gestured for attendants to help Lyra, but Lucien shook his head. Take Adrian first. Full examination. Make sure they didn't poison him, or worse. Father, I'm fine, Adrian started. Now, Adrian. The boy allowed himself to be led away, but not before squeezing Lyra's hand one more time. Mira turned to Lyra next, her expression professionally neutral though her eyes betrayed curiosity. Come with me, child. Let's see what damage you've done to yourself. In the healing chambers, Mira worked in silence, cleaning wounds, applying salves, wrapping Lyra's bruised ribs with practiced efficiency. Other healers whispered in the corners, their eyes constantly drifting to Lyra. You're the talk of the citadel, Mira said quietly as she stitched Lyra's split lip. Twice now you've risked everything for the prince. Some are calling you brave. Others, she hesitated. Others think I've overstepped, Lyra finished. That I should know my place. Can you blame them? In 1,000 years, no human has done what you've done. Maybe that's the problem. Myra's hands stilled. She studied Lyra with eyes that had seen centuries pass. You really believe that? That things should change. I believe a child shouldn't freeze to death because of tradition. I believe Adrian's life matters just as much as any pureblood vampires. Lyra met her gaze steadily. Don't you? Before Mira could answer, the door opened. Lucien entered, and every healer in the room immediately bowed and backed away. How is she? He asked Mira. Bruised, battered, but nothing permanent. She'll heal. Mira glanced between them. though she needs rest. Days of it, ideally. She'll have it. Lucien's eyes found Lyra's. In better quarters than before. Near the royal wing. More whispers erupted from the watching healers. Sire, the council, one began. The council, Lucien interrupted softly, will meet in 1 hour. I suggest you all attend. What I have to say will concern everyone. After they left, Lucien approached Lyra's bedside. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. This human girl with her split lip and defiant eyes who'd somehow turned his world upside down in less than a week. Why did you do it? He asked quietly. Chase them into the forest. You had no weapons, no training. You could have died a dozen different ways. Because Adrian needed help. That's not an answer. You could have raised the alarm. Let the soldiers handle it. Lyra was quiet for a moment, searching for words. When I was 8, I fell through ice on the river near my village. I was drowning, and everyone just stood on the shore, too afraid to help. They said the ice was too thin, that anyone who tried would die too. She touched her bandaged ribs. My grandmother didn't care. She crawled out on her belly and pulled me to safety. Afterward, everyone called her foolish, reckless. But she told me something I never forgot. What? That the right thing and the safe thing are rarely the same thing. And if you always choose safety, you're not really living. You're just existing. Lyra met his eyes. Adrian needed someone to crawl out on the ice. So I did. Something shifted in Lucien's expression, the ice around his heart cracking just a little more. My wife would have liked you, he said softly. She used to say similar things. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. Lucien's voice carried old grief, softened by time, but never forgotten. Adrian is so much like her. Gentle.
Kind.
Everything I'm not. You're more like her than you think. His eyes snapped to hers, surprised. You could have left me in that cellar, Lyra continued. But you carried me to safety. You protected me from the council. You're here now, making sure I'm cared for. That's not cruelty, Your Majesty. That's kindness. Lucien had no response to that. He simply nodded once, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Rest, Lyra. You'll need your strength for what comes next. The council, she knew, was about to learn something new. The Grand Assembly Hall hadn't been this full in decades. Every vampire noble in the territory had answered the king's summons. They filled the marble benches in their finest clothes, silk and velvet in deep crimsons and blacks, ancient house symbols glittering on their chests. The council sat in their elevated positions, their faces masks of barely concealed displeasure. And at the center of it all, in a simple gray dress with bandages still visible on her arms, stood Lyra. She'd tried to refuse. Tried to tell Mira she wasn't well enough, wasn't ready. But Lucien's orders had been absolute. The king wanted her there, and what the king wanted, he got. Adrian sat beside his father's throne, his small hand gripping the armrest. When Lyra had entered, his face had lit up with relief. Lucien rose, and the assembly fell silent. We are gathered, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall, to address matters of tradition, law, and what we consider sacred. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 4 days ago, our citadel was attacked. Many of you lost friends, family, soldiers under your command. We lost security we'd maintained for centuries. His eyes swept the assembly. But we did not lose everything. My son lives. The heir to our throne was saved not once, but twice. By your hand, surely, Lord Morvain interjected smoothly. Your Majesty's power is legendary. By this human girl's hand, Lucien corrected, gesturing to Lyra. When my son lay freezing in the cellars, when I was fighting Volek's forces floors above, when every vampire in this citadel was consumed with their own survival, she chose differently. He descended from his throne, moving to stand beside Lyra. She forced herself not to flinch at his proximity. She wrapped him in her only cloak. She lay beside him on frozen stone, sharing her warmth for hours while this citadel burned. She promised she wouldn't leave him, and she kept that promise even as her own life slipped away. An admirable act of service, Lady Thessa said carefully, for which she has been rewarded with healing and protection. Surely that is enough. It is not. Lucien's words cut through her objection. Because 3 nights ago she did it again. When my son was kidnapped by the spy Garrett, when armed soldiers would have taken him into Volek's hands, she chased them. Alone. Unarmed. Knowing she would likely die. He turned to face the assembly fully. She stabbed a vampire warrior through the leg to free my son. She created the opening that allowed me to end Volek's captain and destroy their forces. Without her courage, without her refusing to accept that humans are merely servants who should know their place, my son would be dead or worse. The silence in the hall was absolute. This council accused her of impurity, Lucien continued, his voice growing harder, of contamination for daring to touch vampire royalty. You wanted her punished for breaking traditions written when the world was different, when humans and vampires had never known anything but war. Lord Morvain stood. Your Majesty, we understand your gratitude, but the laws exist for reasons. To make exceptions is to invite chaos. Then let there be chaos, Lucien's eyes blazed. Because I am making an exception.
Today. Now.
In front of all of you. He turned to Lyra, and something in his expression made her heart race. Lyra of the Western Villages, you have shown more honor than most vampires I've known in 2 centuries. You have proven that courage and compassion are not bound by blood or species. You have saved my son's life twice at risk of your own. He drew his ceremonial blade, ancient steel etched with symbols older than memory. Kneel. Lyra's legs shook as she lowered herself to one knee. Adrian watched with wide eyes, a smile breaking across his face. Lucien placed the flat of the blade on her shoulder. By the authority vested in me as king of these territories, I name you royal protector of the bloodline. You will have immunity from all laws that restrict humans. You will have honor equal to any noble in this court. You will have the right to stand at my son's side, to advise him, to protect him as you see fit. Gasps echoed through the hall. Several council members rose in protest. Lucien's voice rose above them all. The first human ever granted this title. Let anyone who disagrees speak now. The hall erupted. Voices clashed, some angry, some stunned, some actually supportive. Through it all, Lucien stood unmoved. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. I will say this once more, for those who did not hear me clearly, his gaze swept across every face in the assembly. The one who shared her warmth with my son has more heart than all of you combined. She has earned this honor through blood and sacrifice. And if any here think to challenge this decree, his power flared, making the torches flicker. They're welcome to face me personally. No one moved. Lucien sheathed his blade and extended his hand to Lyra. She took it, allowing him to raise her to her feet. Walk with me, he said quietly. Together, they left the assembly, Lucien, Lyra, and Adrian between them. The council watched in stunned silence as the 3 of them walked through the great doors and into the courtyard beyond. Outside, morning sunlight broke through the clouds, washing over the ruins of the citadel. Servants and soldiers who'd gathered to hear the assembly's verdict stared in amazement as the king walked openly beside a human girl, his son holding her hand. Adrian looked up at Lyra, his eyes shining. Does this mean you're staying? Really staying? Lyra glanced at Lucien, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, she said, squeezing Adrian's hand.
I am staying.
As they walked through the courtyard, humans and vampires alike stepped aside. Some faces showed anger, others confusion. But many, especially the younger ones, the soldiers who'd fought beside humans during the siege, the servants who'd witnessed Lyra's courage, showed something else.
Hope.
Change would not come easily. The ancient prejudices ran deep, and there would be resistance. But as the 3 of them stood together in the sunlight, Vampire King, Half-Blood Prince, and Human Protector, Something fundamental had shifted. A new future had begun. One where the right thing and the safe thing might finally be the same.